I'd like to call to order the San Carlos City Council meeting for November 28th, 2016. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Hope everybody had a nice Thanksgiving. Do we have any changes to the order of the agenda tonight?
None from staff this evening, Mr. Mayor.
How about from any of my colleagues? Hearing none. Mr. Rubens, do we have a report from closed session?
There's no report, Mr. Mayor.
All right, we'll move on to council communications and announcements, and we will start with Mark.
None tonight, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Mark. Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't really have a lot to report. I haven't been to really any meetings since then, but I did want to bring up something that has come to my attention once more when I was mayor. Actually, it was my wife that told me about this organization called America Supporting Americans. It was very popular in Hillsborough, and what it is, it's an organization that involves a lot of kids in school to adopt and write letters to American servicemen all around the world. And a lot of servicemen never get any correspondence from anybody. I know that's hard to believe, but apparently they don't. So what they did is this woman, Leanne Thornton, who was with the Hillsborough Police Department, organized this effort she wasn't the one who started it, but she, in her community, organized this effort to have the kids get involved and get to know the servicemen and send them letters and care packages and that sort of thing. And we briefly looked at it a year and a half ago. I asked a friend if he might be interested. He's a longtime resident of San Carlos and also a Vietnam veteran. And he looked at it, and he's retired now, and it was a pretty big job. And he decided that it just wasn't right for him at that time, although he thought it was a wonderful effort. Well, I've just learned recently that our beloved police chief, Chief Rothis, our police bureau chief, has agreed to take on this project. So I'd like to ask my colleagues if they would be willing to support that, and we would have Greg run this program. I think it'd be a great addition for the children of this town to get involved. We have American servicemen all over the world involved in various conflicts and protecting our interests and the interests of other countries. And a lot of them apparently just don't get the recognition that they deserve, and a lot of strong bonds have been formed. So anyway, well, with all of your support, if that's the way you agree, I'm going to hand this off to Jeff, and Jeff's going to hand it off to Chief Rothis. And thank you, Chief, for being here tonight. I don't want to put you on the spot, but was there anything that you wanted to say at all about this, or you can talk about it at another time? Great. Okay. Well, thank you.
All right. Well, thanks, Ron. It sounds like a great program. Thanks to the chief. Any objection from the dais? If not, we'll make it happen. All right. Thanks, Ron. Matt, do you have anything for us tonight?
No, I don't.
All right. Bob?
No, I don't. I think except that Amy, is Amy here? No, she's not here now. Tara, don't we have Friday? This Friday is the Christmas holiday, what do we call it? Night of holiday lights or something. I'm sure cameras probably gonna have pictures, but I figured I'd steal his thunder. Anyway, that starts what time? Oh.
5:30.
5:30? 5:30. Okay, thank you. 5:30 on Friday on Laurel Street. Night of, so all the young people can come down. Great, thanks.
Thanks, Bob.
Sorry.
No, that's great. I just wanted to share a couple photos from some community events this past couple weeks. I had an opportunity to do another Ask the Mayor event at the San Carlos Farmers Market. It was a rainy Sunday, but we actually had quite a good turnout. I was joined by our school board president, Kathleen Farley, and by our city manager, Jeff Malpe. We had a lot of interesting questions, both covering city and school district policies, so I really appreciate everyone who came out and said hello. I had an opportunity to give a talk to the Key Club at Carlmont High School. As many of you may know, the Key Club is a public service organization that's under the umbrella of the Kiwanis Club. It was a really nice opportunity to hear from a bunch of people that are interested in public service. And then finally, I had an opportunity, as I do every month, to speak at the San Carlos Elms to the residents there. We talk about what's going on in the city. They always are interested and wish us all well. They've asked that whoever the next mayor may be, that we keep up the tradition that Mark started a couple of years ago and see if somebody can come by and see them on a regular basis and say hello. So that is all I have. Next, we'll move to Mr. Malpe. Any comments on city administrative business?
None this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll move on to item 6. Tonight we have a very special presentation. We have a very special member of the Sheriff's Department of our local police force who was recently honored by Mothers Against Drunk Driving for his excellent work to reduce drunk driving in our community. As everyone knows, drunk driving is a serious issue, serious public safety issue, and it really hit home in San Carlos this year. We unfortunately had a resident who was struck and killed by a drunk driver while he was out walking one evening with his wife. So it's been an issue that we've been thinking a lot about, and my colleague Mark Olbert suggested that as Deputy John Lothian was being honored by Mothers Against Drunk Driving, that we ought to honor him here as well. And so we're going to do that, and I'd like to invite him to come forward. I have a proclamation that I'm going to read and present to you. I'll come on around. Just come to the podium would be great. Award upon Deputy John Lothian for his outstanding service in removing 105 intoxicated drivers off the street and thereby promoting safer roadways for our community. And whereas through his diligence and expertise, John Lothian has improved the quality of life for the San Carlos community and is an admired and well-respected member of the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed that I, Cameron Johnson, Mayor of San Carlos, on behalf of the City Council and the City of San Carlos, do hereby recognize and express great appreciation to John Lothian for his tireless efforts and unwavering commitment in providing professional law enforcement services to the city, and congratulate him on receiving this prestigious Hero Award. Thank you.
First off, I'd like to thank all of you for coming and supporting this community. Community involvement is key in us as law enforcement being able to address all the issues. I'm thankful that I have a supportive team around me, and owe a thank you to my partners who make it possible for me to arrest that many drunk drivers in the city, and continue to work to make sure that everyone here and in the surrounding areas of San Mateo County is safe to the best of my extent. So again, thank you guys for all coming here and supporting the city and being involved with the issues. Thank you very much. And to the council members, thank you guys for the proclamation. It does mean a lot for a little bit of recognition every once in a while.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your service.
Thanks, sir.
I think the chief wanted to say a couple words.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Mayor and council members, for recognizing John Lothian and his work on this. Obviously, he's done a lot of work. He's not the only deputy that's making arrests. We have a lot of deputies out there that are doing that, and they will continue to do that if people choose to drive drunk on the highway, on the streets in San Carlos. You know, we do a lot of measuring and stats, and we do all that and report out. Sometimes it's very difficult to measure the things that don't happen. And you know, by John Lothian making those arrests and that many arrests for drunk driving, that there's probably some bad things that did not happen as a result of his work. Fortunately, we never know what they were, because John intervened to prevent them. And we're talking about accidents, serious injuries, or worse. So I just want to say I really thank and appreciate Deputy Lothian and all of our deputies who are out there doing the best they can to keep the community safe. And thank you all again very much.
Thank you, Chief.
Through the chair.
Yes, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I may, since I had the privilege of, shortly after joining the council some years ago, of doing a ride-along with a sheriff's deputy, and it happened to be John, and we had a great time that night. He only embarrassed me once or twice, which was good. But in all seriousness, what impressed me the most about the time I spent with him is the combination of his strong sense of duty coupled to a very strong sense of justice as well. That leads to a fair and balanced approach to law enforcement, which I think is the epitome of what we strive to achieve here. So thank you personally as well for all the things you've done.
All right, thank you, Mark. If there are no other comments, we will move on to item 7, which is public comment for items that are not on the agenda this evening. This evening I have one speaker card from Danielle LaCampagne. Good evening.
Hi, my name is Danielle LaCampagna, and I've lived in San Carlos for 11 years, and I have 2 children, and I'm a social worker with San Mateo County, and I work in the area with people with mental health issues. My husband is a social worker with Department of Veterans Affairs. I really appreciate this chance to speak with you all and all that you do as the council and the mayor. I appreciate it. I'm here because I'm not trying to assume that we're all like-minded, but I believe that I'm probably not the only one who has some concerns after the Trump-Pence election. So not to elaborate too much on why, because I think we all maybe know people like me or feel the same way. I just want to read some of the best words that kind of capture why I'm here. Birther, wall, conflict of business, climate hoax, grab them by the POW slander, Banyan, KKK registering lawsuits, lock her, ban them, lack of disclosure, mocking, flip-flopping. So I believe that there's a threat to our values, and I believe there's a threat to people and to our national integrity. And I'm here not trying to assume that we all feel the same way, but I have a feeling that those of you who are on the council may share some thoughts or some interest in thinking about actions to do or strategies or statements to make as a council. And I don't know much about the council, to be honest, or your position. I'm really glad to be here. I'm meeting with a group of San Carlos residents who are very concerned about what's going on in the climate right now, and concerned about San Carlos residents and want to support each other in action in protecting our shared values. And we would just wanted to, I wanted to come here today to reach out and see what your position is. I know you can't comment after this, because I just read that in your guide pamphlet, but I am interested to know. I really hope to be living in a city who's going to make some statements at this time, and hope that we can work together. And together, I believe that we must find a way together, and however imperfect, to connect outside of our comfort zones. This is certainly not my comfort zone to be here, and to participate in very uncomfortable situations and conversations, and to act, since I believe that doing nothing and being silent would be a shame. So that's pretty much all I want to say, and thank you so much for the time.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Appreciate your comments. I have no other speaker cards. Is there anyone else who would like to speak tonight on an item not on the agenda? Please come forward. You can fill out a speaker card afterwards, and if you would just, oh, okay. if you would introduce yourself.
Yes, hi, I'm Carol with Carol Bosch, Nothing Bun Cakes, and I'm speaking today on the behalf of the San Carlos Chamber of Commerce, and I just want to update you on some of the events going on in San Carlos for December. Our weekly farmers market, which has now moved to Sundays, is going really well. We are not going to have a December 25th or January 1st farmers market on Sunday. We're open rain or shine, and on December 11th, we're going to be doing, as you know, a new holiday wine stroll, which I think will be a very nice event it'll come after or during the farmers market and then go till 5 o'clock. Many of the merchants on Laurel Street will be participating, and it'll be a nice way to get our residents out and shopping down in San Carlos. We're going to have the holiday mixer for the San Carlos Chamber of Commerce. It'll be on December 14th at Sparky's Hot Rod Garage, and we welcome all San Carlos residents to join us. It's a very nice event. And then we have on December 18th, we also have a winter holiday event with the Kiwanis Club. As you know, we don't do the Santa in the B of A parking lot anymore, so the Kiwanis Club and Lions Club have been nice enough to sponsor that in the park. And then we want to encourage people to nominate our Citizen of the Year. Our recognition event will be on February 3rd of next year, and it will be at Dominical Winery this year. And we encourage all residents to nominate Citizen of the Year. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, is there anyone else wishing to speak tonight on an item that's not on the agenda? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the consent calendar. Consent items are considered to be routine in nature and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless members of the council, staff, or public request specific items to be removed for separate action. Is there anyone who would wish to remove an item from the consent calendar? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Move approval.
Second?
I have a motion and a second. Crystal, please call the roll.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Olbert?
Yes.
And Mayor Johnson?
Yes. Okay, we'll move on to item 9, reports to council. Tonight we have a report to the City Council on providing Wheeler Plaza parking and a construction update. Good evening, Mr. Savay.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. Since our last update in October, we, as noted at that time in September, we transferred the property to KB Homes, so they are indeed now the owners of the property. Rule 20 undergrounding started right after the last City Council meeting or City Council update in October, and the interior of the buildings is they're starting to abate and demolish some of the interior of the buildings in preparation for demolition of the main buildings there. And the undergrounding activity will continue all the way through February, and then in February, Wheeler Parking Plaza will close to the public. As we talked about at the last meeting, that red line you see on the screen is the extent of the Rule 20 undergrounding area around the building footprint there. And these are some of the photographs that we took recently. As you can see on the far left-hand side, you see some of the activity right at the rear of the buildings there along the fencing, some activity out in Walnut and at San Carlos and Walnut. So these are the kinds of things that people are seeing out there. We haven't received any complaints about the construction activity or general access to the building since that Rule 20 has started. The City Council may have heard some things, but city staff has not received any complaints. In terms of building abatement, that photograph that you see there, you can see some activity at the rear of the Foodville building, and they're starting to take out some of the hazardous material out of the interior of the building, and I'd say around mid-December, the building will be taken down, starting with the Foodville building and then going out to San Carlos Avenue and on to Walnut Street there. And the Samtrans parking garage opened on November 7th, and so it was a big day for downtown parking and for our plan. And there were some a little bit of activity there on the first day trying to wrap some things up, and we had some issues to resolve, but they were resolved pretty quickly. And so as you know, that's 3-day assist Valley, or 3-hour parking, Valley Assist parking there. And it's also for employees who have downtown parking permits. And we have 2 staff on site, so we have an in-park person down as soon as you drive in, and that's one of the gentlemen there that's working in the building. And there's a station with a big red sign, and then that person will direct folks up to the top floor. And we installed another person at the top floor to make sure that people parked in the right place. Samtrans is enforcing parking in the rest of the parking structure, so we want to make sure that people understand that when you go into the building, you got to go all the way to the top floor and park. And well, in terms of outreach, there's been a number of one-on-one meetings. Those continue. And in mid-October, the KB Home had a downtown business meeting. A lot of business owners in the downtown attended that meeting and asked a lot of questions. The Spotlight San Carlos went out in mid-November to all residents and business owners in the city of San Carlos, and we've received some real positive feedback and some thank yous for this. So I know people are starting to take a look at that. And the developer launched their own website, and we also put up some informational signage. As noted at the last council meeting, the council wanted people to, when they drove by the site, you wanted to make sure that people were aware, and there was some good signage out there. We started with some signs right at the entrance to the driveways. That's the sign, a large wooden sign. We have 2 of those out there at the entrance to the driveway, and then on the back of the Foodville building, there's a banner. And then in the windows, you'll see these coming soon signs. And those signs, I think, in terms of the banner and the coming soon type signs, those will change over time as KB Marketing gets involved. And I believe they're developing some additional signs with some elevations and things like that, something a little, more in the marketing realm. So we'll probably see some of those signs change over time. But in terms of the near term, that's what we have out there, and we think that it's pretty effective in terms of letting people know what's happening. This is the website that KB Homes has put together, and it's updated regularly. And one of the things that we're pretty responsive in terms of turnaround time, I think in just the last week or so, there was a request to note which of the buildings would be open for business in the adjacent to Wheeler Plaza. And so those were, a web page was added to that, to wheelerplaza.com, noting that these businesses will be open. It's got their name, their contact information, and their hours of operation. So we encourage people to contact us with any information or suggestions. We're certainly open to suggestions, and we have some folks who are ready to receive information and to respond to challenges and to troubleshoot with everybody. And that concludes my presentation. I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Al. Questions for Al? Bob?
Al, I might have asked you this before, and I apologize. When they go to demolish the I'll call it the furniture building, for lack of another term, that building, are they going to close, or any of the demolition, are they going to close any of the 2 lanes on San Carlos Avenue?
Not to my knowledge. However, Ray Panic is here with KB Homes, and maybe he'd be better to answer that question. Ray?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. No, we would not be closing the street for that. We'll operate from the backside, from the parking lot side. Okay. We will use some parking spaces along the aisle, but not the street side.
At 8 o'clock in the morning, it's okay. I'm just asking, just because otherwise it could be a struggle. The other question I had was, to Al, I think. Thank you, Mr. Panic, very much. The entrance to the parking garage is still on Walnut. We didn't change anything.
That's right.
Okay, so people are going to be directed to Walnut. It's not going to be on Laurel. They're going to have to go make a left-hand turn, San Carlos Avenue, and take a right on Walnut and go that way.
Yeah, and right now, we do have some signage out there. I kind of scrolled through that. But we do have some signage, and you'll see more signage as things get closer and as the Foodville parking lot comes in operation. So we're going to work on the signage in terms of...
I think the key also is whoever the individual or individuals are at Foodville, the valet there or whatever, the person, just that's the first thing they got to know. San Carlos, take a left, take a right, and then, find it there. So, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bob. Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Al, may I borrow the clicker? I have a little 3-slide walkthrough I want to go through. Crystal, can you bring that up, please? Thank you. What I want to touch on is an issue I've brought up several times before, which are what I think of as the improvements are coming signs. To me, it seemed like a very simple thing, a very simple concept that underlies this. Remember, we are about to, albeit temporarily, eliminate the main downtown public parking area. This is going to force a change in habits that date back literally for decades. I don't know when Wheeler Plaza parking was open, but it was a long time ago. But we did this in part because the community is going to get more parking spaces out of it, which are in very short supply today. So it seemed to me what we needed to do with our advertising and with the banners and signs around the parking lot is we need to sell the value proposition: short-term pain, long-term gain. Instead, here's what we have. We have this banner, and we have these signs. And I would submit to you that this is the worst possible messaging that we can do, because what it basically translates to is you're losing your parking. It doesn't say what you're getting out of it at all. There's no value part of the proposition. These comments of mine, by the way, are not triggered just by looking at the signs. They're actually triggered by the fact that when I spend time down on downtown Laurel Street and I hang out at Pete's and I overhear conversations of people on the street and people sitting in the coffee shops around me, that's what they're saying. I've heard 3 or 4 people say, we're losing our parking. It's being taken away from us. This needs to be corrected, in my opinion, right away. It's already a topic of conversation in the community. I believe it's only going to get worse, and we cannot afford to miss what is a prime time for communication, of on-site communication, of the holiday shopping window. We have a lot of people coming to town here who are pulling into the parking lot. It'd be a great time to be able to explain to them what's going to happen and why it's in their interest. That's why I made this suggestion several times over the last few months, and why I'm really disappointed about what we have. So I hope we can do a better job of that going forward.
So Al, I don't know if you want to respond or...
Well, I mean, we're certainly open to suggestion. In terms of value added, I guess that's one of the key issues that I'm hearing. And we can think about ways to maybe add signage that has a discussion of, what's going to happen exactly. Perhaps something that's similar to some of the things that were talked about in the San Carlos Spotlight. So we can certainly do that kind of thing. I think what one of the takeaways was at the last meeting is just awareness, general awareness right now about when things were going to stop for the general public. So we can certainly do better.
Okay, thanks, Al. I don't know if my colleagues want to weigh in on Mark's feedback. I mean, I guess I will say I'm happy that we have signage. So I think that was a big benefit. I think the signs say most of what we wanted to say, which is there's stuff happening and we're acknowledging it and give people time frame. I do think that Mark's main, for me, as one council member, Mark's main comment that we are adding parking the main driving force for the average San Carlos resident is that we're adding parking to downtown is a good message to convey. I think you're pointing out that we've conveyed it in some places. We're not conveying it specifically with those signs. So I'm certainly not opposed to re-looking at the signs and adding, 74 more, or whatever it is, 65 or 75 more parking spots coming soon. So.
Very good.
Anybody else want to?
Yeah, just to add a brief comment. I think what Mark is saying is instructive, and I'm sure that there's some other things we can do. Maybe if it's just the addition of the word temporary parking lot closure, more parking coming. I mean, just a few words might make a world of difference.
My one question or piece of feedback, I know you buzzed right past the picture of the new park or the directional signage to the new parking lot. Maybe you did that because my view looking at them is that they're pretty tiny or they're difficult to see. And so I was a little concerned this past weekend when I was down Laurel Street and I saw those signs, just because I was worried that people weren't going to see them. I see Jay nodding his head. Can you tell us what the plan is there, or if you agree with that assessment? And
Yes,
you mentioned
every
new sign is coming, new parking signs are coming sooner. So go ahead.
Everybody agrees with you on that. So those have been reordered, and you will see larger signs being installed there in the near future. Yes.
That's good to hear. My last piece of feedback is I know that, and maybe this is a piece of feedback for Mr. Panic as well, is I know that construction timelines are never precise. But I find continually that I'm having to revise when I'm saying that things are happening, so I've been telling people that the buildings are going to come down in November because I was told they were going to come down in November. Now they're not coming down in November. And I just would ask, please, if we can try and get definitive dates, because we're out talking to people all the time, and when we tell them stuff is going to happen and it doesn't happen, it undermines our credibility and people stop, believing what we're going to say about the timeline. So I know it's not precise, but I would love if we could be crisper. And I know you just said December-ish, but we don't know. And so I don't know what you guys can say about that, or what were you going to say about
It being in 27 years when I was in that business, you try. You try, but it's a range, and it depends on weather, it depends on subcontractors, it depends on a myriad of things. You dig it up and you go, oh my God, what did we just find here? So
All right, well, then maybe our language should give broad ranges rather than be precise about it. I feel like I keep backtracking, particularly when there's a number of merchants who I see on a regular basis. And they ask me, I give them updates, and they're never accurate. So,
If I may, I think the other thing that, besides changing the way we talk about stuff, and I guess based on my experience and having my own home built, I sort of learned the hard way not to take, I take with a grain of salt whenever a developer tells me when something's going to happen, for all the reasons Bob said. I think what we also need to do, besides changing the way we communicated about it, is this is a need to have more aggressive outreach of information. For example, the merchants on Laurel Street, they ought to either have a habit of going to the website, or we ought to be pushing information out to them so that, maybe even on a weekly basis, it says, here's what it looks like today, just so it's more likely they will know what's going on, because it is subject to change, and we have no control over that. I mean, not even the developer has control over that. As Bob said, you open up the ground and you see something there and you go, oh, well, wish I had X-ray vision beforehand. That's what you're dealing with.
Mr. Mayor, Laura Tuchel, Public Relations for KB Homes, has been working directly with the downtown. I think she'd like to add something about the outreach that we've already done. So.
Good evening.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. So just to give you a heads up, the Wheeler Plaza project website, which is wheelerplaza.com, has an update page, update and timeline. And that update is the result of my checking in with the project manager on the ground once a week. And sometimes there will be no update, but there is an image there of sort of that piece of work that's happening. a date line, and then a range of time when something is starting and finished. I try to be very careful about not using specific dates. So when you're looking for reference as council members, that's really the place to go. Folks are also encouraged to register at the project website. There's a stay informed page, and we have, I think, over 300 registrants at this point. And so sending weekly emails is a little bit of overkill. Sometimes there's nothing to report. So I think at this point we're looking at monthly. And we've done some interpersonal outreach as well to the downtown businesses, and I'm on the ground especially dealing with those 8 adjacent businesses. We have a page dedicated to them, links to their websites, and then we have a link to the San Carlos Chamber of Commerce website, just general support San Carlos businesses. So, thank you.
Thank you. Matt, you had a question?
Yeah, for Laura, if I might. So you mentioned the 8. You're talking about the 8 that are across the street on...
The 8 adjacent to the project site, so that's Tiernan, Poppy, that San Carlos Avenue corridor, Blue Line Pizza, Family Vision Care, which is Cherry Street there, and then Comerica Bank, La Boulangère.
So if I
Wells
might...
Fargo.
Okay, thank you. A comment I was going to make before I heard Laura's was simply that, Mark alluded to the fact that he hears things from people at the coffee shop at Pete's. And I think something that would just do us all well is to stay in touch with, in addition to those 8, all the businesses that are in that 600 block on Laurel Street, because it's not just our project, but, I was in talking to Mike the other day from the Olive Crush, and he was talking about how the project that John Bear is doing is, he wasn't complaining, but he's just stating a fact. It's hurting his business. And it has to do with that thing that I talked about years ago with when we were doing the grade separation. You take away businesses on one side of the street, and you suddenly don't have that synergy anymore. And so I think one of the best ways for KB Homes and you and Al and everything to know what's going on downtown and what the problems are, if they exist, is to talk to the shop owners, because every day they're there, and if it's affecting their business, they're going to know why, or they're going to have some insight. So I think that would be helpful.
Yeah. We started out outreaching to those businesses, and we've continued to do that. We've also offered them signage if they need it, or some kind of informational for their customers in terms of where to park, what's going on there. So we are there to support them, and I'm the boots on the ground on that. So, yeah, thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Matt. Any other questions for staff? Is there anyone who would wish to add any public comment to this item? Okay. Thank you, Al. Thank you, Mr. Panic. We will move on to item 10, public hearing. Consideration of 2017 solid waste rates pursuant to Prop 18 and adopting a resolution approving residential and commercial solid waste collection service rates. Mr. Walter, good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of City Council. Jay Walter, Public Works Director. And tonight we have the public hearing for our 2017 solid waste rates. And I'll be giving the presentation, but if questions arise, we have in the audience tonight the Executive Director for Rethink Waste, Joe LaMariana, who's here, as well as Gino Gasparini, the Public Relations Manager for Recology San Mateo County. And so if there are questions that relate to other areas that I can't quite get to, I'd be happy to call up resources for you in that regard. So just as a recap of our solid waste rate process. Back in the summer of 2016, Recology and South Bay Recycling submitted rate applications to the South Bayside Waste Management Authority, Rethink Waste. Those were reviewed, and the SBWMA board approved the revenue requirements for the collection contractor and the disposal contractor, and they did that on September 22nd, 2016. And this was essentially followed by our study session, your study session, on September 26th, where we got the direction to move forward with the recommendation that we'll have for you tonight. And we issued the Prop 218 notice, which is required to give 45 days notice to all the account holders and ratepayers in the city of San Carlos of tonight's meeting. And we issued that I think the first week of October. So again, a recap of where we are with 2017 rates as we go forward. The 2017 collection revenue, which is estimated at the 2016 rates, is 8.1 million and some change. When you take away the Recology Services compensation, the South Bay recycling, disposal, and processing costs, and the city costs and franchise fees, we have a slight deficit in the 2017 rate year. That alone is not the basis for any rate adjustments that are made. As we move forward, we are always looking at essentially a 3-year window of revenue reconciliation. So when we look at what occurred back in 2014, we now know that we had an actual surplus of $328,000. We have an estimated surplus from 2015 of $101,000. And from last year, we have an estimated surplus of $131,000. So all told, right now, where we sit with our 2017 rates as we're ready to go into January, is we have a surplus in that 3-year revenue reconciliation account. Not real money necessarily, but it is money that helps us as we go year to year if we have deficits or surpluses to have some cushion. One of the other issues that we identified at our study session was that when we look at our total revenue collection amount, and we break that down into the commercial revenue and the residential revenue, we can see that we have, on the commercial side of the house, we have more revenue collected than the actual cost of service by about 17%. And on the residential side, we actually have less revenue collected than the cost of service by almost 29%. So we identified and talked about the disparity there and the issue of Prop 218, which essentially allows us to recover all of our costs to provide the services for refuse collection. And yet we are supposed to have the rates that are charged not exceed the funds that are needed for providing that service. So we talked about the idea that we needed to begin to make adjustments so that we can bring the commercial and residential revenues in line with the cost to provide the services. And so as a result, we provided the council options for 2017. And essentially what the council gave us direction on was to go with option 5, which is a gradual transition for commercial and residential rate realignment of 2%. So a 2% general rate increase for residential cart sizes, and those differences on the far right side indicate how much the ratepayers will be paying extra per year as it relates to the particular cart size that they have. And on the commercial side, we had the decrease of 2%, and you can see on the far right side, you can see the amount less per month that those accounts will be paying for the various cart and bin sizes that are on the left side. So that was the direction we had to go out with our 218 notice, and we went ahead and we issued that. On the unscheduled services, these are the services that are provided that are special in nature. They're subscription-based, so it's backyard collection that is going into a yard and rolling the carts out to the front to be dumped and then putting them back, things like that. And these are paid only by the subscribing customers. And per the contract we have with Recology, there's a predetermined index in that franchise agreement that this year results in an increase of 0.51% in those unscheduled services. So the costs for those particular services for our account holders that are subscribing to them will go up by that amount. One little wrinkle that we had that came up here very late in the process, and this is something that's occurred just over the last couple of months. We currently have a service called At Your Door, which is a household hazardous waste pickup service that's offered by Waste Management. And this is offered to San Carlos residents. They call to schedule a pickup at their convenience. They make arrangements for what has to be picked up. Waste Management comes out and takes care of it. That contract will terminate at the end of calendar year 2016. There was efforts made to renegotiate, to extend, and there was no agreement reached, and so the board made a decision to go ahead and terminate that contract. Now, there will be notice sent to all the participating agencies and customers so that they know what is going to be happening, and there are locations around the county currently where residents can drop off these materials free of charge. That's also information that's going to be provided to the residents as well. So with this contract not being renewed or extended, essentially the city has some amount of revenue that is collected, and it's in the category of the agency fees. And for San Carlos residents, the single-family residential dwelling cost is $5.75 per annual, and the multifamily dwelling cost is $2.69 per annual. These are baked into the garbage rates. So when a garbage bill comes out, there's a line item that says, this is the amount for household hazardous waste. So this amount total for San Carlos is $57,398. So what we're talking about, and I want to make a recommendation to the council to go forward, is to make an adjustment in our rates for 2017 to take this into account. Now, one of the options for doing this is to add a line to our current resolution tonight that you'll be adopting. And that would be to indicate that this program has been continued and that you would have the, essentially the, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. I misspoke. Will be discontinued. And we would have a line in the resolution which would indicate the amount for multifamily and single-family dwellings that would be deducted before the bills go out. Now, based on conversation with Recology staff, they act on the resolutions that the council adopts. So when it has 2% rate increase, 2% decrease for commercial and residential, it has unscheduled services going up by a certain amount. Another line item in the resolution will allow them to make the adjustments in the bill. In this way, we don't collect that additional $57,000 in revenue from customers who will not have that at your door service. They will have the ability to drop off those materials, but however, they won't have the pickup at their door that they currently have. So to get down to the recommendations again, we, as per the 218 notice, we're recommending that the council adopt the resolution, but tonight modified slightly for the 0.51 increase for unscheduled services, the 2% decrease for commercial customers, the 2% increase for residential customers, and direction to eliminate that household hazardous waste amount from the garbage bill by adding that line, those two lines, to the resolution as we go forward. Next steps, obviously we received direction from the City Council back in September. The Prop 218 notice went out. Tonight we have the public hearing. As I understand from Crystal, there have been 2 protests officially filed with the city prior to the meeting tonight. And then with council action, the adopted rates would become effective on January 1st, 2017. So that's all my presentation, and I'll be happy to take questions. And as I mentioned, we have resources in the audience if it's something that I don't know.
Great. Thank you, Jay. Questions for Jay? Bob?
Jay, in your third page of your report, or I guess in the attachment 2, I guess, there's an amount that says we have, for the second year in a row, the agency fee includes $163,085 litter control fee, which is trash reduction efforts in the stormwater program.
Yes.
And last year, did we have that same amount?
We had that same amount in 2016.
Okay. And that is included, in other words, and even so that was in there, we ended up with a surplus of $131,000.
That's correct.
Okay. Is the 163 this year baked into that 134, 131 deficit?
It's based into, yes, it is based
Okay.
in, it's baked into that.
And, just because we were successful last year doesn't mean we're going to be successful this year, but there's a possibility that negative could turn, for whatever reason. It obviously was a huge amount. It turned a great deal of positive number for this year. So I just wanted to make sure that I had that question answered. And I think that's all I had, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Bob. Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Jay. Couple of preliminary questions, and before I get into the main thing I wanted to ask you about. The household hazardous material change that you were talking about, I'm a little surprised that we're hearing about it this late in the game. And I guess what I'm also curious about is since that's a change to the scope of services that previously have been provided to residents and businesses, I presume, in San Carlos, why wasn't that brought back to the council earlier so that we could perhaps give direction to our representative saying, push harder for that, or that sounds great?
Maybe our representative would like to
If I
address.
could explain, we were in, and Joe can correct me if I say it wrong, in negotiation up until literally the last hour, the 11th hour, and our meeting was what, November 4th? It's November 17th, and we haven't had a council meeting since then to try to work this through. And it was they rejected the compromise that we tried to work out. That's why you didn't hear about it. But maybe you wanted. I'm sorry. Maybe I should have asked.
No, that's actually that partially answers my question. I guess the broader question is, if the service provider basically said, I have no interest in doing business with you, I don't care what you pay me, that's one thing. But if it was a matter of how much we're willing to pay, to me, that's something that we should have had an opportunity to discuss here at some point. No, not in the last 2 weeks, I grant you, because we haven't had a meeting. But if the negotiations were underway, why didn't we have an opportunity to discuss that sooner? We might not have changed. We might not have given any different advice than what ended up happening without it. But we didn't have the opportunity to do that.
If I may comment, quite honestly, the proposals as they were coming forward as we were discussing the 2017 revenue requirements with both South Bay Recycling and Recology and the waste management contract, essentially extension, we had planned out for a number of years of extension, and it looked like the extension was going to get agreed to, and we would move forward with that. So it was a surprise that we ended up not being able to follow through and actually continue to provide the service, because we had fully expected we were going to be able to keep it going on another 3 or 4 years, if I remember the numbers right.
Well, I appreciate that. I guess, and every negotiation environment and situation is different, but in my experience in negotiating over the years, normally, you can get a sense of where parties are long before you get to the final date. But none of us own a time machine, so we can't go back and change that now. Just as a reminder for me, Jay, can you remind me when we are going to be talking about, speaking of negotiations that are underway for the entirety of the contract with Recology and South Bayside Recycling? I thought, had agreed last time that we wanted to have an opportunity for the council to provide input to that process before the negotiations go too far down the road, which are currently underway. So when are we doing that?
I may need to ask Joe LaMariana to come up, and he'll talk about the subcommittee that's been formed to carry out those negotiations and a number of meetings that have been already scheduled and where that process is. So please, Joe.
Thank you, Jay. Hello, Mr. Mayor, fellow council members. I'd like to just comment on the process of the renegotiation is actually has begun. We are having a technical advisory committee meeting on January 5th. We've just confirmed that will be broadcast, and at that meeting, we're looking to solicit the input from the 12 member agencies of our Joint Powers Authority to be able to comment on what they would like to see specifically in the negotiations. Our goal is to produce a universal franchise agreement that has a common core of services for all 12 member agencies, and once that is approved, each member agency will be able to sit down with the service provider and talk about services that are specific to their needs and what the costs associated will be. So you'll have several opportunities to do that. But January 5th is the time that we have just confirmed for that.
I appreciate that, Joe. That creates an interesting challenge potentially for staff and the council, because we only have one meeting scheduled between now and January 5th, and it's traditionally not a meeting at which we do anything substantive. So I will leave staff to figure out how we're going to address that. But it seems to me that if we're serious about wanting to have some input into the negotiating process, even if the input is, hey, what you guys are thinking of doing sounds great, we have no further input.
Right.
It sounds like we have to do that before January 5th.
Well, that's one time frame in doing it, and as I said, there's another time frame later on when you're talking specifically with the service provider as well.
Well, but that's after the general framework, for lack of a better term, of the
That's
contract
true.
is defined.
Yeah.
At which point, you know, the horse, if it hasn't left the barn, has got its head most of the way out of the barn.
Right.
So,
Well, I can also assure you, we've been working with staff to get a general idea of what we're looking for, so this would be,
and I appreciate that, and I'm glad that you are. On the other hand, to my knowledge, staff has not had any input from the council or discussed with the council what council might want to see. And I have a great deal of respect for staff, and they know the details of this far more than the rest of us, but I think part of our job is, on occasion, to provide inputs on these major long-term contracts.
hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
With those two items out, Jay, the main thing I wanted to bring up is the issue I touched on with you in our telephone conversation earlier today, which is, you know, a resident, Bill Barron, who I think is here, had brought to our attention the notion that there's I'll call it a discrepancy between residential the fees charged for certain residential account holders, basically dependent upon whether they happen to live in a single-family home or in a multifamily environment of less than 4 units or a larger multifamily environment, the larger ones being put on the commercial account schedule. And as we were talking about earlier, since the commercial accounts subsidize the residential accounts, you can understand why folks that are on residents who are on the commercial schedule are particularly sensitive to that. They see their fellows in San Carlos paying a lot less for essentially the same service. I would just be interested in your perspective on what we could do about that.
Well, I haven't had any time since our phone call this afternoon necessarily to do much research on it. But I did have a chance to chat with Joe briefly before the meeting. And as I understand it, there is, to a degree, the 5+ units to be characterized as commercial versus residential is something of an industry standard. So it isn't a particular specific thing that our Joint Powers Authority decided at some point in time that that's the way we're going to go. Apparently, it is something which is more commonly used as a kind of a discriminator between when we decide commercial versus residential. Doesn't mean that we can't look into the idea and really find out, do some exploring with Recology as it relates to the costs and the potential impact of having a higher number of those. And as we talked today, the idea that you would have multiple bins at a particular location could create operational issues as far as being able to place them out and make them ready for collection. And not only that, a greater amount of time to collect. So it's something which I think bears looking into, because we have a number of locations that are the, let's say, 5+, which are, say, between 5 and 10, that may be possibly able to do something with bins and maybe residential. But it's something I think we should look at.
Do you have, and I realize, again, that I appreciate the conversation we had earlier. I knew you didn't have much time to look into this, but do you have any sense, if we were to modify that 5 threshold and say it's 10 going forward, 10 provided that the entity is not using a bin service already, you know, for whatever reason they may have, if it's carts and it's 10 units or less. Do you have any sense of what financial impact that would have on us? That obviously would result in decreased collections. On the other hand, we've got some other things that are increasing collections. So,
I guess, again, not having a lot of time to reflect on this or kind of talk to our industry partner in this and our collections contractor, I think there is an impact from an operational standpoint for revenue hours, route hours, as they're called, which means that it's likely that if you ended up with, say, multifamily units of 10 or less that were going to be using bins, you might end up with as many as 8 to 10 bins per complex, which all have to be collected, picked up, and then put back. So there's more time that goes into that versus the idea that you would have some of these complexes that are already using a 2-yard bin or potentially a 3-yard bin, which can be picked up by a different type of truck, loaded, and then they're on their way to their next stop. So to a degree, there's a lot of calculation that would have to go into it. I haven't done anything about that, but I think that that math exercise is worth the effort just to see what it might impact.
okay, well, I appreciate that. I'll come back to that when the council is actually discussing what to do. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to clarify something you said earlier on those household hazardous waste contract with Waste Management. That is going to end at the end of the year. And that was a certain amount of money that was not going to be charged. And is that already factored into those 2% increases and 2% decreases?
No, it's not.
It's not. What happens then?
So the amounts, and again, I didn't have time to determine what the change in the percentage would be, but essentially a 2% increase on the residential side, we would deduct off that $5 and however it was, $5.75 amount for their bill. So it's currently a line item. It would be taken off the bill. They wouldn't be charged that. So it's going to be something slightly, essentially they'll be charged something slightly less than 2% more for their bill this year.
When I did my math, it worked out to about 48 cents a month
That
on
sounds
that
about
household hazardous waste. Okay. But then apparently we're trying to renegotiate this.
Not at this time.
Not this time around. It would happen. So there's going to be a gap then.
If there would be an opportunity, it may happen in 2017. I don't believe the board has given direction on that at this moment in time. So unless and until they do, we would be, say, outreaching and publicizing those locations within the county that residents can take their household hazardous waste to and drop them off. It's them taking them there rather than the company coming and picking them up.
Okay, well, that makes sense, because I was at this vision of, rebating the money, and then we go back into negotiations, and now we have to ask for it back again, and we've already set the rates. So, but you explained it, there really will be at least a one-year gap.
At least, and again, that's a very good point to make. So another option that the council could consider if they chose would be to hold and leave that revenue to come in and then decide based on next year or at some point in the future when a contract is renegotiated, then they have that money. So again, council has some options tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ron. Matt?
So I'm going to ask some questions to try and understand how all this is done, even though what we're really trying to do here tonight has to do with just these rates. But when you were answering questions for Mark earlier, I just want to make sure I understand this correct. Currently, I live in the downtown, so I see, like, on the other side of Walnut Street, for instance, apartment buildings where they're putting out 8 cans in black and 8 cans in blue, and usually they don't put as many yard waste cans out because there's not that much landscaping at these buildings, but so they'll put a couple of yard waste cans out as well. And the one particular property I'm thinking of, what they do is they put it on, they have a gravel area between the curb and the sidewalk, and they just stack them all up there, because if they put them on the street, people couldn't park. So how the heck your trucks get to them, I have no idea, because if people are parked there, they seem to me it's not very accessible. Those apartments in those situations are paying a commercial rate, not a residential rate?
The ones that have more than 5 units are paying a commercial rate for.
Which is currently per gallon higher than residential rate.
It's higher. If you took the same cart, the same size black cart from residential to commercial, they're paying a higher rate.
So that would explain why I know we got a letter, I think everybody got it, an email from a guy who either owns an apartment building or he lives in one of these apartment buildings, saying, this isn't fair, you need to straighten this out and make the rate for my tenants the same as it is for anybody else who puts out a can with residential waste in it.
That was, I believe, the nature of that email, and Mr. Behrens is here tonight.
And so what you were saying to Mark is eventually we're going to address that issue.
If the council decides to give me direction to go back and evaluate that as a potential option going forward in the future and bring it back to you for discussion purposes, then that's part of what we'll be discussing.
Well, if it's appropriate at this time, Mark brought it up, I just brought it up, see, and I think Mark and I are on the same page, so all we need is Mr. Mayor, all we need is a third member of this dais to say, yes, research that, because
I'll be the third.
Okay.
I think everybody wants it.
All right, very good. I wanted to make sure I understand the hazardous waste issue, because if I understand that correctly, that was where you could put out certain things and or call them and say, I'm gonna have certain things out in front of my, like paint cans or something. Please pick them up. And they would pick them up and so forth. But on the other hand, we also have service where you can walk into City Hall and drop off cell phones and batteries and things like that. Does that mean that will discontinue?
No, that won't discontinue.
So
Those are picked up by Recology. So that's just, it happens to be an additional location where some of that material gets dropped off.
Okay, so after, with this change in the hazardous waste material, then if you have something like that, you're cleaning out your garage and you find a bunch of paint cans you want to get rid of, then what you have to do is run over to Recology and take care of it that way. Would that be the solution?
It's not Recology, but Gino or Joe, maybe one of you guys can help the council understand how many locations and where they are, where residents would be able to go to drop off these things.
Okay.
Hello again.
Hi.
Hi. So the topic of household hazardous waste, it's illegal. We want to keep the bad stuff out of the landfills, trying to do the right thing. The program ceased to exist at the very last minute because the contractor was unwilling to adjust their rates. Their rates were going to increase dramatically over the proposed 5-year term. They were going to double in year 5. And our board made a decision not to pursue that particular contract because of not only the prices doubling, but also a very low participation rate. It was averaging about a 5% participation rate, which means 95% of the households were paying for a service that 5% of the residents were using. In terms of your options, now you have several options. One of them is to bring the material up to Tower Road. The county owns and operates a household hazardous waste drop-off facility up at Tower Road, which is at 92 and 280. It's open Thursday, Friday, and Saturdays, or you can bring some of the material down to the Shoreway Environmental Center. We're currently working with the county to have some drop-off events throughout the entire SBWMA service area throughout the year to accommodate residents' needs.
Those would be a little bit like, I'm sorry, those would be a little bit like the e-waste events.
Yes, that's exactly what they would be. Yeah. There's several that are currently planned for the southern portion of the SBWMA area, which is Menlo Park and Redwood City. Those have been ongoing and they are fully permitted for those sites. It does take some gymnastics to get a site permitted to handle this material, even if it's accepted on a temporary basis. So we're working on trying to get some of those events northern, in the northern part of the SBWMA, and even at our Shoreway Environmental Center. That's the obvious place to do it. So our board has given us direction to look for either temporary events to be held at the Shoreway Environmental Center or have an ongoing household hazardous waste drop-off center over there. So staff is working very closely with some industry experts to see how we might be able to accommodate that. But
And I don't want to take too much our time here, but hazardous waste, some of the things are obvious, like paint, turpentine, paint thinner, those kinds of things. Car batteries, perhaps, if there's still people out there that do that kind of thing on their own.
of all types, yeah.
Yeah, batteries of all types.
Yes.
But, fluorescent lights, of both the tube kind and the compact size. So rather than just go through the laundry list, I think, if I may, Mr. City Manager, since we're making these changes, something in our newsletter, to point this out to people that this is going on and this is how, because what we don't want to see, obviously, is illegal dropping and so forth. So
it's
to
imperative
alleviate
to
that.
understand that we do have options. That was also one of the concerns expressed by board members, including our chair, Mr. Griselli, who wanted to make sure we were maximizing. Yes. Make sure that we were maximizing the county programs. There was a feeling that there was a redundancy to this at your door program and the service that the county was providing. So we're working very closely with the county's HazWaste staff, to maximize their program and make it available for all 433,000 SBWMA
And then
residents.
two more questions on this topic. Having gone through, when I went through my cancer treatment, I was ending up with sharps and all kinds of things at home. And I always had the choice of taking them with me, and I'd always forget to take them back to Stanford with me. But my understanding at that time was the only place I could take some of those things would be the Belmont Police Station. So that's something that I just mention that because it comes to mind, and it's something that I know from going through cancer treatment, there's hundreds of people that go through cancer treatment. I saw them, and I'm sure that becomes an issue, not just with cancer treatment, but other kinds of things too, medical, especially with so much stuff that we're being asked to now do at home to take care of ourselves, to save money, medical costs. So, and education to the public on those kinds of things could be useful. So that's. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, I'm sorry, excuse me.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just in a closing remark on that, first of all, congratulations for successfully completing that treatment. My wife and my daughter are both survivors as well. I know what's involved in that.
Yeah.
So I commend you for that. There are a number of different subcategories of household hazardous waste. There's universal waste, there's electronic waste, and then there's household hazardous waste. And in addition to that, you then also have pharmaceutical waste, you have sharps. So there's lots of categories. There's very specific permitting requirements to handle each category of that material. And it's a very challenging segment of the market, of the materials that we handle. It's a very small component of it, but it's very important, and we must keep it out of the landfills.
And the last question then on this topic, we've talked about residential. Is there any change going on with commercial? In terms of hazardous waste, I mean, they have fluorescent light bulbs. They have.
They certainly do. This program was specifically geared for residential.
Okay.
It only was targeted for residential. If you're a commercial business that generates household hazardous waste, you will need to seek out a service provider and contract or subscribe to service for them.
Okay. With these rates that we're talking about, Jay, any change to the special pickups that people were entitled to a couple times a year or one time a year or whatever?
Only the household hazardous waste. So the bulky item collection that's still part of what they can get. So that was not affected.
Okay.
Only the household hazardous waste.
And then lastly, I wanted to ask about something I asked about before. Sorry, I lost my iPad went out here. I'd have to log back in. But in the staff report, it says that there's no fiscal impact to the city. So am I to understand, I had asked the last time we looked at this about what rates do we pay as a city, because we have containers at the parks, we've got containers at City Hall, and different forms of waste pickup, either big commercial bin kind of trailer things, or we've got the cans. But it says in here that no impact to our budget. Is that because we don't pay anything and it's paid for by the ratepayers of our citizens in commercial, or do we pay something?
And I have to apologize, I didn't get that information in advance. If I might ask Gino Joe, if you wouldn't come on up. I sort of like phone a friend in a way. I'm glad he's here tonight. It's not something that I had gotten.
Yes. The costs are captured in the overall pool of expenses, and the expenses are divided into the residential and commercial rates. So the ratepayers do bear those costs directly.
So the ratepayers, both commercial and residential, are paying
Actually, the residential.
Just the residential?
Looking at Gino. Gino, I know it's residential, and I think it's commercial too. That part I need to.
Mayor Johnson, members of the council, Gino Gasparini. The franchise agreement, the initial RFP that was submitted to all the companies that were bidding on the services, each of the cities had an attachment B service level. What you were getting from the prior service provider, they were all listed out as part of the services that we were to provide for a specific cost. So we gave you that cost, including the city services.
So if you could just answer the question simply, then what that says is that the residential ratepayers bear the cost of whatever it costs for the city.
All costs that we charge for residential, commercial, multifamily apartment, the city services are included in there, as they were in the prior contract.
As they were prior, okay.
Okay, anything else, Matt?
No, that's all I had.
All right, thanks. Mark, you had an additional question?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually triggered by something Matt was talking about. I'll call it the infamous hazardous waste program, which just is in the process of terminating. Is there a statutory or regulatory reason why we could not change that to a bill by usage system? In other words, not assess it as a fee against every single account in San Carlos, but just say, hey, if I call up because I have hazardous waste I want to pick up, I pay a fee associated with having that picked up.
I believe going forward, that could be a way to arrange such a service.
Okay.
At this point, probably there are many ideas on the table for that.
But you don't know of any reason why you couldn't do that. The reason I got to thinking about that is because it also sounds like the Recology, what I think of as the Recology drop-off place for fluorescent light bulbs, that's going away too, because that's serviced by this contractor?
No.
No, I didn't get that impression.
Okay,
No.
I misunderstood part of the dialogue between Joe and Matt then. So in other words, residents would still be able to go drop off their batteries and their light bulbs over at the SBR facility?
That's correct.
Okay, good. Thank you.
I just wanted to answer Mark's point, and just on the individual basis, when you broke it down with waste management, remember we're talking waste management now, they charge anywhere from $110 to $150 if you broke it down per. So I mean, I'm just giving that's the number they charged. So it's a fairly large number now, and that's basically because they had to take it to Tracy. That was the biggest cost, the time, and they charged for that. So I'm just going to give you a sort of a benchmark of what it could cost. I'm not saying it would.
Oh, yeah, no, I appreciate that. I figured it was something like that because there was a statistic quoted that only 5% of the accounts actually utilize it. So the fee is going to be, the actual cost is going to be roughly 20 times as high as the person fee. But frankly, what got me thinking about it is that 5% of the population or the accounts that are using this service, they might be willing to pay, in other words, to pay the higher fee, because otherwise they're going to have to traipse off to wherever to get rid of this stuff.
Okay. This is a public hearing. I have one public speaker card, and I'd like to invite him up now, Mr. Bill Behrens. Good evening, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. Excuse me. My name is Bill Behrens. I live at 793 Elm. I'm here this evening representing the Elm Street Condominium Homeowners Association. I wrote to all of you earlier this month and spoke to you at your last meeting. I won't repeat any of that, and I want to thank Councilman Olbert for raising this question that I've been trying to address now for several years with a little success tonight, and I appreciate that. I had a scenario that I was going to present to you, and then it was going to end with the question, can someone explain to me why a single-family residence or a four-family residence pays $68 a month for a 96-gallon cart, and anybody with more than 5 residences in a building, in our case 24, pays $86 for that same identical black cart. It doesn't make any sense to me, and I was going to ask if it made any sense to you, and I guess I can see now that it probably doesn't. But that's a significant difference in cost. That's about 26% if I figure it right. I suspect there's some economies in picking up the 3 or 4 carts in front of our building compared to having to drive down the street and pick up 4 carts at 4 different locations. The problem comes simply out of your franchise agreement, which defines a multiple family dwelling as Jay said, as a building that contains more than 5 residential properties. And a commercial definition concludes with a sentence that reads, commercial collection includes service provided to multiple family dwelling customers and agency facilities. I've spoken with Recology. Those definitions are not important to them, as I'm sure you understand. They need a certain sum of money each year. How you collect it is up to you. So I want to encourage you to ask and direct the staff to come back to you soon with a report. I hate to see it wait another whole year. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Through the chair, and actually maybe a question for Greg. Are we, since this is a public hearing, are we allowed to ask questions of the folks who have made comments?
Oh, yeah, if it'll help form your opinion on the subject matter, yes.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Behrens, for coming to speak to us again. I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. You live in a 24-unit multifamily place?
That's correct.
And so there are 24 black carts?
No. We pay for 4 carts. We almost regularly use 3. Although tonight, when I was checking, I discovered that 4 were in use.
Oh, I see. So the residents consolidate their...
That's correct.
Okay. I was trying to imagine how one could fit 24 carts on the street, but okay, thank you.
No, and in fact, we pay extra to have the crew come into the building and take the carts out to the truck.
All right, thank you.
I'm glad you had some public here this evening.
I have no other speaker cards. Is there any other member of the public who would wish to speak tonight? If not, I would ask for a motion to close the public hearing.
Move to close the public hearing.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Crystal, please call the roll.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
And Mayor Johnson.
Yes. And then I would ask for a motion on commercial waste rates.
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt Resolution 2016-115, a resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos approving the 2017 residential and commercial solid waste collection service rates with, you're going to show me that slide, aren't you? With the suggested resolution language as evidenced by Mr. Walters. I won't read the whole thing. The whereas is there.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
I would like to say just a couple of things. I'm fine with the adjustments. They're fairly minor. I'm disappointed to find out, though, again, when we address this issue, that the city is receiving service for free. Fees such as these are supposed to be for services rendered to a property, not to cover the cost of what the city gets as a service. The city, I figured this out years and years ago as a council member, that when we have street sweeping done, residents pay as part of their garbage rates for street sweeping because that's contracted as a subcontract to the supplier of the garbage rate service. But when they go around sweeping the streets, they don't sweep the streets, all the streets, because not all the streets have curbs, but they're all paying. And not only are they all paying, but they're also all paying for the curbs that and the streets that get swept in front of Burton Park or any other city facility. So the city is receiving street sweeping for free, which would also include a plaza that's not going to exist anymore, Wheeler Plaza, but all the other plazas as well. The parking plazas, the street sweepers go through those and sweep. So the city receives all that for free. And now I find out tonight that the city also gets their garbage picked up for free. That simply, to me, is not how government is supposed to work. The government is supposed to pay its fair share as well. And I know people would argue, well, we all pay taxes, it all goes into the general fund, and here we are paying fees, there's no difference. No, there is a difference. And I don't have the time to, give a classroom explanation of what that difference is, but there is a difference. And it's wrong for the city to receive these services for free. So having said that, I will support what we're looking at, but I've brought this up on street sweeping, and now I'll bring this up on garbage for as long as I'm on this council, that this is not right for this to exist this way. And it's not, I'll close with this. I know this doesn't exist just for the city of San Carlos. This is something that exists throughout the system for every city and town, or whatever Woodside calls itself, in San Mateo County.
Thank you, Matt. Mark, you want to make some comments?
Yes, I did, and offer a competing motion, actually, too. Just had a quick question for Greg based on Matt's comments there. Greg, is it within the council's discretion to, what's the right term, to consolidate, include the costs of picking up trash for the community assets in the rates?
This has been something that we've looked at before, and it's a combination of something that's in the franchise agreement that every city in San Mateo County and that has a franchise with Recology has included in the contract, as was brought up earlier. And it's something I've opined on about these general services are, the public does benefit from them generally. And I'd be glad to talk with you in more detail about it, but generally some of the examples that Councilmember Grocott brought up, we've contemplated before about the street sweeping, and the public is benefiting from that program for a couple reasons. One is we're keeping this material from flowing into the bay, and we have some obligations under the stormwater to keep the stormwaters clear. Litter, if we didn't clean the streets, there might be litter that residents would actually have to pick up because it would be blowing off of different areas that they would have. So on those bases, those are just general anecdotal things. But on that basis, it's my opinion that they are something that the residents are, and the ratepayers can pay for through the franchise agreement, and that it's not inappropriate or out of the ordinary for the city to not actually write a check to Recology for it, but include it in the entire franchise.
Okay, well, thank you for explaining that. I mean, it had sounded to me like, there are, for each of us, there are services and benefits we get from being part of a community that we personally benefit from, and there are ones that we indirectly benefit from. I mean, essentially part of the taxes I pay go to maintain our parks and whatnot, and I'm embarrassed to admit the last time I ever played ball in a park in San Carlos, or my kids did for that matter. But I'm happy to do it because it's part of it's part of the both duty and benefit of being a member of a community, and a great community like San Carlos. But I appreciate you clarifying that. The competing motion I wanted to make was basically, if I may, to accept all of the elements of what Bob moved, but put a further amendment on it that we would change the threshold for what constitutes putting a multifamily residential account onto the commercial status to any account that uses less than 8 carts, not bins, but carts, less than 8 carts would qualify on the, or would be charged basically on the residential rate schedule rather than the commercial rate schedule. So it'd be a change from 4 to 8. My understanding being the current rule is 4.
Right. Just a point of clarification, would your motion, the way I understood you said it, it would also apply to actual businesses in commercial that use carts?
No, actually, what I'm contemplating, Jeff, is it would just be residential only. And I'm doing that because we seem to make a distinction between commercial accounts and residential accounts to begin with.
Jay, did you want to make a comment? Or?
So what Mr. Walter just said to me, and we'll probably need Greg to weigh in here, is that that changes the language in the existing franchise agreement. So the question is, could we even do that tonight?
Oh, okay, I'm interested in Greg's response. I didn't realize it was actually part of the franchise agreement. I thought it was some local statute that we had.
Well, that definition is in the franchise, and, our solid waste ordinance has a lot of language in it that I haven't analyzed, obviously, in response to this question. I'd be glad to look at it for you. But tonight also, there's another issue, is that we've already published the rates, and I don't know how that would affect the rates for, and there.
It would be lowering them, which I think we're allowed to do.
You're allowed to lower them, but but the resolution's set up to specify exactly what the rate would be. And so we wouldn't have, that hasn't been studied yet, is the point. I mean, I know what you're.
Oh, I agree, it hasn't been studied. I think that absent the issue of having to amend the franchise agreement, which I hadn't thought about, I think the rest of it is, if the council chooses to, within its authority, because we'd be lowering rates.
Well, you can set a rate, but I'm looking at the resolution, and it actually sets the rate for the coming year in a resolution, and that's what the franchisee uses to set the rates and send out the bills. So obviously you could have a lower rate, and we'd probably want to talk about if this substitute motion were to get a second and be discussed. I'd probably want to talk with Jay about if we could come up with some rate that would get there. I imagine we couldn't.
Well, you may have identified the first, actually you did identify the first and most important thing, which is we do nothing if there's not somebody else who wants to second my motion. So.
I have a question. So to help out what Mark is trying to do, it seems to me we could, as part of our motion, change the commercial rate on residential multiplex units to achieve what he's trying to achieve with his motion. It doesn't have to.
So if I could just weigh in, I mean, you both gentlemen have consensus from the council to have staff study this issue and come back. Is that not sufficient, or do you want?
To me, it's not sufficient because, as this gentleman pointed out, that means waiting a whole year. And I don't think we want to necessarily wait a whole year.
I was just going to make a similar comment, Mr. Mayor, in a slightly different fashion, which is I would be willing to, again, my motion hasn't even been seconded, but I'd be willing to withdraw it if we were to bring back this discussion at an early date, not wait an entire year. But that basically implies that if we were to act on it and lower rates, somehow we have to make up the revenue from someplace, and that somehow is probably going to be out of the general fund for 8 months or 9 months,
True.
assuming we went through with it.
And we would not have to, I don't believe, change the agreement, because what your motion essentially was moving those customers from commercial to residential, and you don't have to do that. You can just change their rate in the commercial. You're lowering it, so you don't have to worry about the hearing or this whole process. But you just change the rate for now within commercial for multifamily.
And the one question I have about that is, does that affect every single multifamily account? Because remember, I also said there was an upper limit on the number of carts.
Right.
It would affect everyone.
No, you could carve out, as you proposed, if they put out 8 carts.
Or fewer.
Or fewer, then this is their rate. And if they put out more than 8, then this is their rate. It can be done.
If I can just weigh in and provide my 2 cents for you, this seems like a pretty complicated change to try to make on the fly tonight without any numbers or any idea where we're going here.
So can you get back to us?
Right. So, I mean, I think there's definitely, staff definitely understands there's an appetite from the council to get this back to you as soon as we can. So we will, we'll move some things around and get this back to you as early as we can next year. After the first of the year for you to consider. And I'll ask the attorney, can the council change rates? They can change rates retroactively, right?
They're not really retroactively because it's an entire rate structure. But once the bill goes out, you can't really issue a rebate. That gets really complicated. But if we do it quickly enough before the first bills come out, then it wouldn't be considered retroactive, even though it went back to the first of the year. However, as long as you reduce the rate, we could just by resolution adjust the rate structure at any time during the next calendar year, as long as it results in a reduction without having to go through the Prop 218 notice.
Then I, based on Jeff's commentary that staff understands the concern and will bring it back as quickly as they can, I will withdraw my motion.
All right, thanks, Mark. The motion on the floor is Bob's motion. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, Crystal, could you please call the roll?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Johnson?
Yes. Okay. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. We'll move on to item 11A, consideration of introducing an ordinance amending section 10.32.226 of the San Carlos Municipal Code, restricted parking related to the East San Carlos residential parking permit. Good evening, Ms. Peterson and Ms. Flores. How are you?
The others had disappeared, so I am introducing Kristen Flores, Senior Management Analyst, who will be taking you through this presentation this evening. Thank you.
Good evening, Kristen.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. All right, so I'm here tonight to give a brief presentation on the final evaluation of our pilot residential parking permit program. This program was initially approved as a condition of approval with the Transit Village project. And in December of 2014, a petition was received from the 3 blocks, Cherry, McHugh, and Montgomery, asking for the program to be created. Between March and July of 2015, staff worked with the GESC neighborhood to develop the program. And in August 2015, the council adopted the pilot program. And the implementation just began shortly thereafter. The program was a pilot program adopted for 1 year with a mid-year evaluation, and it began in January of 2016, and the mid-year evaluation was presented to the City Council in July of 2016. And that brings us to where we are this evening, which is nearing the end of the pilot program year and a final evaluation of the program. So in completing the final evaluation of the program, we looked at both some quantitative and qualitative data. For the quantitative, on the number side, we looked at permit and enforcement statistics, as well as the cost to implement and operate the program. And on the qualitative side, we used informal feedback that we received in the way of emails and phone calls and conversations over the pilot program year. And we also mailed out a survey to all the residents and businesses in the greater East San Carlos neighborhood. So I'm going to cover some of the quantitative enforcement statistics as I'm talking about the survey results, but I thought that I'd start tonight with the costs of the program. And the costs are broken down in 2 ways. So over the course of this pilot program year, we've had sort of the startup costs of the program, which are estimated to be about $170,000. And that includes costs for an additional community service officer, an additional enforcement vehicle, the signage and getting the signs installed, and the permits and program administration. And then it's estimated that if this program is made permanent, that the cost will be about $123,000 annually. And that amount has been included in the current operating budget. All right, so as I mentioned, an informal survey was sent out to all of the property owners and tenants of both residential and commercial properties in the greater East San Carlos neighborhood. And the survey was designed to further inquire about some of the issues that had come up during the mid-year evaluation and sort of see how they felt that the program was going. We were happy to receive a strong response to the survey and have gotten over 155 responses from residents in that community, and they continue to kind of trickle in. Even in recent days, I got a few today. So from that survey, we saw that 72% of respondents in the program area agreed, somewhat agreed, or strongly agreed that enforcement of the program was sufficient. And in looking at the enforcement data, we see that between January 1st and November 7th, that 460 citations were issued. So that works out to be 46 or so citations per month, plus or minus 10 citations per week. The hours of the parking restrictions. Currently, the program has 2 zones, a residential zone and a business zone. In the residential zone, the parking restrictions are from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., and in the business zone, they're from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. 82% of the respondents in the program area agreed or somewhat agreed or strongly agreed that the hours for the parking restrictions were sufficient. We did get some comments that respondents would like to see the hours extended or pushed into the weekends also. And with that, it was just varying opinions. Some would like it to go until 8, some want it till 10. So there wasn't really a strong consensus of what would be preferred with that, and it was just a few comments. There wasn't a lot of that we saw. So extending the times of the parking restrictions is something that staff will continue to evaluate, but there aren't any changes proposed at this time. And north of Holly Street. So the survey that was sent out to the blocks south of Holly Street that are participating in the program, and it also included Holly Street and the blocks north of Holly to sort of take the temperature of how they were feeling the parking situation in their neighborhood was, and if they were being impacted by the pilot program that was happening in the blocks south of them. So 24 residents in the neighborhood north of Holly Street completed the survey, and the general consensus was that the first 2 blocks north of Holly, which is Springfield and Sylvan Drive, are the most impacted by parking. We also saw that there was some mixed consensus and opinions in the neighborhood about whether or not the program was needed. As you continue to move north from Holly Street, the blocks didn't show as much interest in the program, but noted that their opinions may change as development continues to happen around them. So staff proposes that the municipal code and the program itself be amended to include the blocks north of Holly Street, and that means that it will basically provide the neighborhood with the framework to petition to be included in the program at a future date. And staff is planning to hold a community meeting in early 2017 to work with the neighborhood and sort of further determine their interest in the program and the timing of when they may be interested in petitioning to participate in it. And if this program is expanded and some of those blocks north of Holly do eventually petitioning to be included in the program, it is anticipated that that additional cost can be absorbed in the amount that's included in the current operating budget. And so while this program has been generally successful, there's definitely been some lessons that have been learned, and so we thought that we would share several policy considerations with council, just sort of food for thought moving forward and thinking about how this program might be duplicated in other parts of the city. So one of those policy considerations would be requiring an identified cause of non-resident parking. So if there is a neighborhood that was interested in having the city evaluate the need for permit parking in their neighborhood, requiring that there must be a clearly identifiable cause of that non-resident parking in the neighborhood. So that could be a school that's nearby, a commercial use that's nearby, but sort of requiring there to be something that can be identified. And then in addition to that, requiring potentially a parking study and a use threshold. And so if there is one of those clearly identifiable causes of non-resident parking in a neighborhood, requiring that a parking study be completed to confirm the impacts of parking in a particular neighborhood. And what we've seen is that many agencies that have these requirements will set a use threshold. So once you do the parking study, that if it's over 65% parked or 75% parked, that would indicate the threshold has been met and that the parking permit could be considered. And then also the cost for permits and just the consideration of the cost of the residential and business permits in relation to the cost of these types of programs, and adequate enforcement and the ability to adequately enforce additional permit zones. So the next steps moving forward is staff is planning to meet with the neighborhood north of Holly in early 2017 to further work with them on determining their interest and timing of a possible petition process to participate in the program. And then if the program that's currently in place in the block south of Holly is made permanent, staff will continue to monitor and enforce it. And so before council for their consideration tonight, the recommendation from staff is to introduce an ordinance amending the municipal code section on the parking permit program, and then to adopt a resolution approving the East San Carlos residential parking permit program. And with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you, Kristen. Questions for Kristen? Bob?
Thanks, Kristen. So apparently the weekends haven't risen to the level of weekdays. Is that what you're saying? There's not a hue and cry that why isn't this 7 days a week? So it sounds like it's the folks that are taking the train or commuting that caused the problem to begin with. And the Giant games affect it a little, but not as much, at least on weekends. It's doable, I guess, on the weekends. Is that basically what we're saying?
Correct, yes.
Okay. And then the 123,000, what makes up 123,000? Because we had to hire a new CSO?
Yeah, so it's the annual cost of a CSO plus some of the permit program. We have an online system that we use for permit applications and permit fulfillment. So that's those costs.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Kristen. Just a quick question. In terms of expanding the program and including north of Holly Street if they petition to join, where are we vis-a-vis, I think of it as South Walnut, you know, that's another area that has complained about parking spillover from the business area down there. Where are we with that? Are we still getting high levels of complaints from there? We talked to the neighbors there, or what?
So we hosted a community meeting with them. I believe it was early 2016. January, February, and what we've been doing as there's been different developments with the lease or parking studies, we got an email list of people who attended that meeting. So we've been trying to keep them up to speed. And I have gotten one or two questions recently, actually, just sort of about the progress of that. And Al might be able to speak to it more, but I think there's a couple pieces in play before we would get to the point of creating a parking permit program.
Yeah, I'd be interested to get a little bit more insight with that, because it seemed to me that there was an even earlier step, which is enrolling them potentially in the program so that if they choose to participate, then they can more quickly become subject to it. And that's, in other words, I'm not talking about rolling out the program down there. I'm talking about making it so that it can be rolled out as quickly as we want to. That's my question, basically. Why would we not expand it to include South Walnut?
Right. And that's a possibility. Based on the meeting that we had, one of the primary concerns that both the merchants in the area and the residents had was the need to provide additional employee parking out of the neighborhood. And so as a first step to that, we've been working with Samtrans to try to develop a lease to lease some land there. And so that was kind of our first step, because the neighborhood had a little bit of a, well, if we do that, maybe we don't need this approach. But if we don't do that, even the neighbors felt like it would be problematic to put in a permit parking program without. So that was kind of the step that we were all waiting for before we sort of move forward and reevaluate with the neighborhood about whether or not they want this.
Okay, I understand the logic behind doing the South Laurel parking commercial area might dovetail into this. But can you enlighten me as to why the residential people down there were saying, don't put a permit parking in place? Was it that they saw the downsides to them personally?
Oh, definitely.
Being greater because they'd have to get the permits and they'd have visitor problems and all this other stuff?
Absolutely. I mean, if you could solve a parking problem without a permit program, anybody would rather live without a permit parking program than with one. If you could, if all things were considered equal and you had the parking.
If you could, and hence that's why, if you can get this other thing arranged, which, is that coming back anytime
That'll be
soon?
back in January, yes. We're this close, but we couldn't quite make the agenda.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Matt?
First question, and this might be for the Sheriff's Department, but whoever can take it. I'm curious, because you're setting up this thing about 5 days a week and 2 days, the weekends and so forth, and based on the surveys and whatnot. But my question would be, is it more complex to do a 5 and 2 system in patrolling, or would it just be easier if it's just the same thing every day, 7 days a week, in terms of when the hours are, or maybe it's just 24 hours a day. The only way you can park on the street is if you have a permit, and if you're parking on the street and you don't have a permit, and an officer drives down that street and sees your vehicle without proper permit, then bingo, you're ticketed or towed. So I'd be curious from the Sheriff's Department what their opinion on that is.
I'm here with Sergeant Pettit tonight. Sergeant Pettit has done a lot of the scheduling and stuff for the CSOs and deploying the CSO. So I think in terms of scheduling, as long as we can keep it simple, we can meet that. We have flexibility. We have part-time CSOs and we have full-time CSOs. And we have the ability to schedule them. It becomes, the later we schedule them, the more difficult it becomes to schedule them because many are in school and whatnot. So we're fortunate in that we have some flexibility to schedule.
Is it then, what you're saying to me is it's only the CSOs that enforce this program?
I don't believe our deputies write sites for that. It's just our CSOs, correct, Steve?
If they're directed on a call, the deputies will do that. They'll do that enforcement if there's no CSOs that are available. But it's primarily the CSO's responsibility to enforce the permitted area.
And when you say if they're directed on a call, you're saying if they happen to be down that street because there's some other call, or are you saying because somebody calls the number and says there's a car parked in front of my house and it's not supposed to be? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So what I'm hearing from that then is if it were the same 7 days a week, it puts more pressure on the CSO program, which we don't necessarily want to see. Is that what I'm hearing?
We can make the schedule changes that the council wants, but any expansion of the hours and
higher dollar figure.
It could be. I mean, we could try to do what we can, work within the budget. But one of the things it becomes, it looks like we're able to meet the expectations of the community right now as the way it sits. And there's not a compelling desire to expand the program in terms of hours. People seem to be satisfied. The more we expand it and the more we say we can do, then the more we have to do, and the more we run the risk of maybe letting them down in a few hours. What our concern has been during this program is that we absolutely must enforce this and make sure that they are satisfied with our enforcement, because council committed to it. So it is a trade-off. Do we want to extend the hours when it's not compelling to do so and run the risk of not being able to meet that need because we've complicated scheduling?
And so if we expanded it geographically, either to the north side of Holly, or I was going to get into later, I've already had people who live on School Street seeing problems with commercial issues on their street compounded. It's kind of like the tide when the tide comes up and then it rains and you get flooding. In this case, it's commercial activity coming in the neighborhood and something the school is doing, and so you're getting cars wanting to park from two different issues, and then people can't park on their own street in front of their homes. That was going to be another question: is what process? You kind of hit on it a little bit, but people are asking me, how do we apply? And I don't know those details. So if you
Turn that part over to Kristen in terms of how they can move forward with the
okay, but
applications.
before you do that, then, so just to make sure I understand, then if we expand the program geographically to say the north side of Holly is the most logical place right now, and I have heard some people on the north side of Holly say, as soon as you did what you did on the south side of Holly, especially on, Springfield, we immediately started seeing cars parking in front of our homes that weren't there before. So if we do that, then also that adds to the cost of the program and the pressure on the CSO program.
We think we can absorb that, and there's a couple of reasons, especially if we set hours that are similar. We'd really probably want to set similar hours there. That would help us with scheduling, number one. Number two, proximity. It's very close to the area we're already enforcing. And number three is area size. It's a very small area.
Yeah.
So it's not a big deal for us. If we were going to be doing it, let's say up, on the top of Eaton, as an example, and we had to commute back and forth, and that could be a little bit different, So I think we can absorb that. I'd be obviously, before we would go at those two streets on the east side, the other two streets, I would be very interested in seeing the parking studies first.
Okay. So
on
Bob's neighborhood is out of the question. It's
out of the question.
all right, moving on to Kristen then. Why is it always you? So what was I asking about? Oh, the process. Yeah, if, for instance, these, people who live on School Street, should they just contact you and do this offline, or what should I tell people?
So the neighborhood where it's set up now is sort of unique because it was created as one of the conditions of approval for the transit village. And so it's kind of just moved ahead because we had that condition. But some of those policy considerations that I went over, I think, are some of the things that council would want to consider and sort of set up a policy of how people would try to set up a program if they need it in their neighborhood. Correct.
And what you just reminded me of, correct me if I'm wrong, the part of the agreement with the developer was some kind of payment from the developer to help pay for this program, correct?
Yeah, they gave $10,000 for the
Per year for a certain number of years, or remind us what?
for 1 year.
1 year, okay. Okay, and I'll just throw this out there. I would just be curious, and maybe this is for discussion later, Mr. Mayor. Every once in a while I get mentioned to me, well, if you go to Menlo Park, you can't park overnight at all, anywhere in town. And I would really be curious to know what effect might that have on policing and crime activity? Does it help or hurt? And from my fellow council members, is that something that we would, I know we would get a hue and cry, but is it something that we would ever be interested in pursuing, that people, instead of using their garages like a U-Store place, they actually use it to put their cars, and we clean up the streets. And then when we, advantage to that is, the things we were talking about earlier with garbage, street sweeping and so forth, it just simplifies that. So
I think it would result in a rapid and significant turnover of the dais.
Perhaps so.
Beginning with certain council members.
Well, I won't be here, so it's not my issue.
All right. I see no other questions for Kristen. Is there any member of the public wishing to speak on this item? If not, I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I will move to introduce ordinance number
1516.
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of San Carlos amending Section 10.32.226 of the San Carlos Municipal Code, restricted parking, East San Carlos residential parking permit program. And do I also make that second one?
One at a time.
One at a time, separate
Okay.
action.
One at a time.
Second. Oh, sorry.
Okay, a motion from Mr. Collins, a second from Matt. Any discussion? If not, Crystal, please call the roll.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Johnson?
Yes.
All right, and I move to adopt Resolution 2016-116,
116.
a resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos approving the East Side San Carlos Residential Parking Permit Program.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Crystal, please, any discussion? Crystal, please call the roll.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
And Mayor Johnson?
Yes. Okay, we'll move on to item 11B, consideration of adopting a resolution approving the plans and specifications for the Highlands Park Playground renovation project. Ms. Newby. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor, member of the council, members of the council. Good evening. Tonight, we'll be presenting the Highlands Park Play Area Renovation Project, which also includes the replacement of the restroom at Highlands Park. Both the playground renovation and the park restroom replacement are funded in the CIP budget for the current fiscal year. Back in June, we entered into a professional services agreement with the landscape architectural firm SSA and to begin designing the play area renovation. So tonight we have with us Scott Reeves, Associate Principal with SSA, who will be presenting on the project background, the feedback and input we've received from our public meetings, the design elements of the play area and the restroom, and plans for the project moving forward.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Thank you. Scott Reeves, SSA Landscape Architects. As Amy mentioned, we came on board to help design this playground area, and we had three main goals. One was to expand and improve the playground itself. Two was to expand the capacity of the restroom, and three was to enhance the aesthetics of the playground itself. Let's see if I can. Highlands Park is set in the west side of San Carlos in the hills. It's a park well known for its sports fields, but it also has a nice but aged playground area. It also, as Amy mentioned, has a restroom that is needing renovation as well. So this is an image of the existing playground and restroom area, which is in essence the extent of our project area as bounded by the white line. And here's a photo of what that looks like right now. The restroom's on the left and the playground is on the right. This is looking into the park from the parking lot or the front entry of the park. To give you a little background on our project so far, we started the project off with a public workshop. I'll go into the details of that in a little more detail, but that's what really inspired our design effort. From there, we brought our design back to the Parks and Recreation Commission on October 5th. Got their input, and then continued to finalize our design process. We are here before you now to show you that final design. From here, we look to move into bidding over the winter and start our construction period in the spring of 2017 with a goal of opening the playground and the restroom project by summer of 2017. Here's an image of our community workshop. We had 14 attendees. We had, and also we had many children that attended. The highlights of, or the takeaways of that meeting were that the community that attended preferred a themed playground and they preferred a nature theme to this park. And we think that was because of the setting with the trees and with the hills of where this park's located. The other feedback highlights that we received were that the community wanted to maximize the quantity of play features as well as the area of the playground itself, expanded as much as possible. They wanted to see climbing and sliding features, and they wanted to preserve the seating and the natural shade that exists there now. One of the fun things that we did with the community to engage them was a process of voting or providing feedback using their cell phones to instantly populate a word cloud. That gave them, that allowed us to see their perception of what the playground and the park looked like now. So the question we posed was, what words best describe Highlands Park to you. And they were able to use their cell phones to help us populate this word cloud, and that's what it looks like. We then went on to show them different theming options to inspire them to start the discussion about what this playground would become. We showed them a nature play theme. We also showed a shapes and forms theme, two completely opposite ends of what this playground could become, and then asked them to vote on that as well. And that's where we got the nature theme that rose out of that discussion. So from that workshop, we then went back and worked with the city to develop our design. And this is a culmination of that work, which we showed to the Parks and Recreation Commission. The highlights of the playground would be that this playground expands in the footprint that is currently there now by 750 square feet. So it's 750 square feet larger than the playground that currently exists. We're enhancing both the 2 to 5 playground area as well as the 5 to 12 playground area with nature-themed pieces that we wouldn't see in any other park in San Carlos. In the 5 to 12 area, or 5 to 12 age range area, we're proposing a treehouse type two-structure play structure with a bridge that connects those two, natural themed elements. In the 2 to 5 play area, it would be a post and platform structure with nature theming to it and unique pieces that surround that. And then we're also proposing what's called an oodle swing, which is a group swing that promotes socialization and it's a new take on a swing. Our surfacing is proposed to be poured in place rubber, which is more maintainable. It also allows us to improve ADA accessibility. On the ADA accessibility note, we're also proposing to improve the hillside walkway that goes around the backside of the playground so that we can allow somebody in a wheelchair to access what we're now calling the upper playground area. That's where we're expanding the playground is in the image there to the upper portion of the playground. So up into the hillside, we'll have a secondary entry point and an increased playground area in that area. Some of the other notable features are that we are looking to preserve as much of the existing seating as possible, but to add to that so that we do have increased seating opportunities for parents and children alike. And we're proposing to enclose the playground on 2 sides with fences so that we can guarantee that we can control access into the playground as well as when the children are in the playground, helping parents to supervise their children. And then the other piece that I'd mentioned was the restroom component, which is on the left side of this image. We are proposing to replace the existing restroom with a new prefabricated restroom. Some of the seating that I alluded to would be in the form of a group sun deck and concrete seat walls with backs, both enhancing the concrete seat walls that are there now and adding more of them. So we're trying to get seating around the entire perimeter of this playground. This is the inspiration behind the treehouse idea that we brought forward to the city, which is the treehouse on the right is up in the hillside and the treehouse on the left is in the lower existing playground area. This is an example of what that product could be, with the image on the right being the 2 treehouse type elements connected with a bridge. Ours would be longer than this to reach between the hillside and the main playground, but the idea is very similar. One of the feedback items that we received from the Parks and Recreation Commission was to make sure that our upper entry point was ADA accessible, which in this image it is not. And so we have revised this image. We don't have an updated image of it, but we have an accessible entrance to that upper treehouse feature. This is the oodle swing that I alluded to. It's excellent for socialization with children. It also is ADA accessible, much more so than a traditional belt swing, and really promotes socialization. This is an example of what the independent features could be and what we're proposing in the design. And these would be spread throughout the playground. This is an example of what the perimeter fencing would be, with the image on the right being, we will have one gate into the playground at the 2 to 5 play area. At the 5 to 12 play area, it would just be an open entry, approximately 10 feet wide. Moving on to the restroom component, we were tasked with expanding the restroom capacity. And so we believe that the best way to do so is to replace the existing restroom with a prefabricated structure. So this is the structure that we're proposing. It exceeds the amount of capacity that is in the current restroom, and it also exceeds the amount of capacity recommended by the city's restroom consultant who completed a study earlier this year who made the recommendation for what needed to be done at this playground. So it would be a women's restroom, a men's restroom, and then a third restroom, which would be an all-gender, or what we know as a family-style restroom, with a utility chase in the middle for ease of access into all the utility pieces for the maintenance. The structure would be a CMU prefabricated building, and it would really look similar to the existing maintenance and concession stand that exists on site now. This is an example of what this company makes with a CMU style building like the one that we're proposing. Yes, sir. CMU. Concrete masonry units. So the blocks that you see in this that actually make up the walls would be of a similar style, which is the same as what exists in the current maintenance and concession building that's on the other side of the playground, or the other side of the sports fields, I should say, on site. And so we would propose a similar style two-block system where the bottom third is a certain more enhanced detail known as a wainscot, and then the upper two-thirds would be a standard block. And the roof would be very similar. We may not see some of the enhancements such as the exposed trusses, but the style would be, other than that, the style would be nearly identical to this image. And with that, I would love to take any of your questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions, Matt?
On the restroom issue, I noticed that some of the county parks, for instance, at Edgewood Park, they've converted all those bathrooms, I believe, if I haven't gotten this wrong by going into them, but they're just simply restrooms, and they have stalls for each one, and you just walk in, and I don't know if they get more real estate out of that, more stalls and so forth, by just having it be, you know, single stalls, and they are, or what. But I just kind of wonder with ours, if we're doing this, if instead of having men's and women's, just have, you know, all one thing.
You mean all of them being all gender,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
not defined so anybody could use either space?
Yeah, more like the family type thing. I noticed the same thing when I was actually getting my cancer treatment at Stanford. A lot of their restrooms in the public areas are, you know, you go in and it's just one type. They're not marked men's or women's. They're just marked restrooms, handicap accessible.
I don't exactly know when the project was completed, but there was a study done recently of all of our park facilities. And so taking this completed project that was done and taking their recommendations, which does have still a separate men's and women's, and then incorporating the family restroom. But it's something that we can, you know, look at in future projects.
So, okay.
We do have a park restroom replacement project that's larger, and there's funding this year, next fiscal year, and then it skips a year in the two, you know, like 18, 19, 19, 20. So we can look at that down the road for our other park restrooms.
Okay. And just if you're taking notes, another example I think of is Arastadero Preserve in Palo Alto, and it's the same thing. I think there's like 4 or 5 restrooms, all with an individual door. You walk in, there's a toilet, there's a sink, and that's it. And there's like 4 or 5 of them right in a row.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yep.
Yeah.
I think that footprint-wise, the men's and women's is more economical than the all-gendered just due to the partitions and the divisions that are needed. And so that was why we carried through with that design, also because it's what exists there now.
Okay, and then I just had one other question. I'm not real familiar with Highlands. It's not one of the parks I go to a lot, but I noticed you had the seating. And I was looking at it actually on my iPad on the maps feature. And it looks like there's currently seating that does go around some of this.
That's correct. Let me see if I can bring up that
But
image.
you're improving it by putting the backs on as opposed to just.
The existing seat walls we're preserving wherever we're not expanding the playground, and we're adding the backs to them so that they're,
Okay.
and then we'll replicate that detail with our new areas where we are expanding. So it acts as a contiguous seating opportunity.
Okay.
Thank you, Matt. Ron?
Thanks, Cameron. Yeah, I just have one question. You mentioned a rubber surface, which I think is great, but in visiting one or two other parks, they seem to get a little worn after a few years. It looks like they crack and they've got, areas that break and that sort of thing. Has the technology changed? Are they much better now?
They're better, but I'll qualify that statement. They're miles ahead of the other surfacing options. So the maintenance that's required for like a loose fill, like what people call as the wood chips or the tan bark or sand, the pour-in-place rubber is miles beyond that in terms of the reduction in maintenance requirements. There still is wear issues with pour-in-place rubber, especially in high-use areas, under swings or in entry points where kids are running a lot. They've improved, but they're not bulletproof.
What's the average life expectancy of that type of a surface?
They're typically warranted between 5 and 8 years. And so it's not out of the realm of possibility that within 8 years you'll be cutting out a piece and replacing it. It's typically really isolated portions, but compare that to the amount of labor required to maintain loose fill surfacing, it's significantly less, because in that time frame, all you're doing is occasional cleanings.
Are they ever subject to vandalism?
They're pretty resistant. The vandalism, most typical vandalism is people trying to cut them, but it's very rare, extremely rare.
I guess it's a question for Amy. When we do that, assuming we do it, do you buy some extra and keep it in storage, or do you just wait, the extra years because you figure the technology will be better when it's time to replace it?
So as Scott mentioned, there is routine maintenance, and then there's the every few years the fixes that need to go and happen in the surfacing where it's higher use. This year, I believe our parks maintenance staff requested funding, which was approved for ongoing maintenance of this material. It is the most accessible material, so it is preferred for use in our parks. There is, though, that routine maintenance, then the additional maintenance every 3 to 5 years or 5 to 8 years.
Yeah.
I guess you have less broken bones in those things, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's an important point, that you can guarantee your impact attenuation. It's basically the highest in consistency, the highest level of consistency compared to other surfacing types.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Ron. In the existing playground, and it's been a little while since I've been there, but there's sort of separate areas for younger kids and slightly older kids. And I wondered how you're thinking about carrying that through to the new design. And you said that there's a tot gate. I don't think there is one today. And can you just talk about what the philosophy? Did you want sort of a separate play area for younger kids, and how do you think about that?
Yeah, thank you. It's important to understand that we're actually not dividing the play between the age groups within the play area. We're just using the fence to define the exterior of the playground, which is one of the feedback items we heard from the community, was especially from the upper play field, there was dogs that sometimes run down through the playground. And so there was an important piece to them to make sure that that upper side was well defined. So we're proposing a low fence along that side to help define that portion of the playground from the upper play field. Now, if we come down, immediately adjacent to the restroom is intentionally where our tot area is so that those kids and parents can easily access the restroom. And so at that access point, we're proposing a gate to divide the restroom from the 2 to 5 play area intentionally so that the younger children are well contained and parents can supervise better knowing that their kids are staying in that area and not able to exit without going through a gate.
Okay. But it's not total, it's hard for me to tell. It's not completely fenced off, so you can walk directly from the sun deck down to the rubber safety surface, is that right? Or?
Exactly. So in that image, everything in the blue is open and connected. So play can happen from one end of the blue area to the other end. So that whole space is one contiguous play space.
So you have essentially a partial fence underneath that tree there with the gate?
Yeah, where the sun deck is, that's the main entrance.
Okay.
And yeah, I can define. I'll better define it here with a mouse. I apologize that
No, that's okay. I'm just
that this isn't clear enough.
Having a little bit of trouble.
Yeah, no,
visualizing.
I can appreciate that. This is our main entrance around the sun deck. This main entrance is open, defined by seat walls on both sides. So the spaces between those seat walls.
I see. So you step down from there?
Well, it's flush
It's
through
flush,
there.
okay.
Yeah, it's just defined by different spaces.
I see.
Oh, sorry. Oh, there it is. Down. This is where the seat wall ends. Is where the low fence begins here, and it defines this lower portion of the playground. And where my cursor is now is where the low gate would be. That helps define the 2 to 5 play area, and which we call the 2 to 5 play area as this componentry here, and then the 5 to 12 play area is this componentry up here, with the swing being the connector between those that's intended for all ages.
Okay. And so the upper is the tree houses?
This is the upper area here that connects from the upper hillside.
Yeah.
To the main play area.
And I don't think you had a slide on what you're planning for the tot structure.
You know, I didn't. It's called a post and platform style with steps up and a slide down and panels around the sides. It would be themed in a nature theme, so the panels would be nature orientation and the steps would look like tree stumps or something of that nature.
And then what is the shaded brown area in the lower right?
The shaded area on the lower right is new mulch. We are proposing to enclose the existing electrical transformers with a maintenance fence. And so we would just be replacing mulch in that area based on any construction impacts.
So, but that area is like not accessible? Okay.
Yeah, it's not intended as a play feature. It's just a landscape area that's currently mulched right now, so we would be replacing it in kind.
Okay. And so you said you had 14 participants at your public meeting.
Correct.
And then you had this came before the Park and Rec Commission. Did you get any constructive feedback or any concerns raised by either the public or the Park and Rec Commission or people who attended that meeting when these designs were presented? And
The main feedback that we received from the public was the ability to enclose the side to divide it from the sports fields, and the idea of making it as large as possible was really what they asked for.
Mm-hmm.
They felt that as the size it is now, it was not sufficient for the park space. And so they really wanted to see it as big as possible. The commissioners were in support of the design, and they did ask that one of the nature-themed pieces we change out. It was a tunnel that does exist at another park, so we did address that comment. And then they also asked that the upper treehouse feature be made accessible, ensure that it had an accessible entry, and so we did that as well.
Okay. I guess the last thing I'd ask is, you know, one of the nice features that we have about our parks is, you know, there's a lot of sort of idiosyncratic touches or local pieces that make it feel like it's not just a generic park that is dropped out of the catalog and, you know,
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I wonder if is there any opportunity to do that? You know, at Burton Park we have hand-painted tiles and we have other things, but I don't know if that was discussed or if there are any plans to add a personal local community touch.
There certainly is opportunity. Do you want to address that, Amy?
That wasn't discussed, but there is opportunity. I don't know, just some of the element that we felt was very unique to this design was the tree houses and the tunnel connecting it. So that was just something that, with the topography of the land and kind of using the hillside, was something that was very unique that we brought to this project.
Yeah. I mean, I don't disagree with that. I hope that, you know, in developing it, you look for an opportunity to either allow the neighbors or folks that, you know, use the park to have some local stamp on it so it feels like it's well integrated into the community.
Through the chair, if I may, just to, I think the idea of getting community input to these things and community elements is a good one. Personally, I'm both a little hesitant and would raise the issue about doing too much of what you were describing as a local feel. These are community parks. And in fact, in my experience, while they certainly draw from the immediate surrounding area, people visit them from all over the city and even from beyond the city too, for that matter. And so the local is really all of San Carlos. I mean,
I don't disagree, and I mean, I don't have any objection to folks from throughout San Carlos. I'm just saying, you know, whether it's kids pressing their hands into the concrete or putting, you know, hand-painted tiles or something that adds a little bit of character, I think would be a nice touch. So.
That part I all agree with. It's because that's community input.
Yeah,
okay?
That's what I mean.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Matt, did you have anything?
Yeah, I just, there's a couple other things that I thought of. I mean, I'm ready to approve this, but just to be noteworthy, really isn't a question, it's more of a commentary thing. One, I agree with what the mayor said about having some element somewhere where they can personalize it. Number two is one of the things I noticed at Burton when I go, especially in the summer, and it gets a lot of use, as Mark suggested, to some extent, from people who don't live in San Carlos. We do such a good job with our parks that we get people who visit here from all over the place. And I like to believe that when I walk into a bathroom and it's trashed, it's not our residents that are doing that kind of thing. But there are certain things that can be done with how you dispense toilet paper, how you dispense paper towels, or whether you have hand drying machines. Having all wash systems where you can just go in with a hose and spray the whole darn thing down, and there's no lid on the toilet seat. It's just something that, you know, so, you know, you're the architect, you're specifying these things, I suppose. And so I would just throw that comment out there that as much as we can make these things bulletproof, if you will,
Yeah, I appreciate
all the
that.
better. You know, and yeah, so that.
And I
that's
can
just
speak to
comment.
that.
I knew there was something else. Sorry, I'm getting old and I lose my thoughts sometimes. You mentioned the rubber surface, and I would think, you know, I used to coach wrestling, and one of the issues you have with wrestling is people get skin rashes and so forth, so you have to wash this stuff down every once in a while. And so my question is, this rubber surface, can we do that, where we're washing it down for like ringworm and that sort of thing, or is that part of our maintenance program? Or
Part of the maintenance program is cleaning the equipment and the surfacing.
yeah, very good. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no other questions, is there any member of the public wishing to speak on this item? If not, I will entertain a motion.
Mayor, I move,
Oh, sorry, did you?
May I? I don't do this very often, so if I may.
but it's such a long one.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, here we go. I'll put my glasses on, okay? So, like I said, I'm getting old. So I move to adopt resolution number 2016-117.
-117.
So that's a resolution of the City Council of San Carlos approving the plans and specifications for Highlands Park Playground renovation project number C9363, and authorizing an additional appropriation of $450,000 from the park restroom replacement project number C1718. Also authorizing the advertisement for bids, authorizing the expenditure of a construction budget with contingencies, and authorizing the city manager, who's over there, to execute a construction contract with the lowest responsive and responsible bidder if the bid is within construction budget. So you didn't really want to do that, Mark.
Actually, I was waiting the entire evening, Matt, to do that.
Oh, man.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. Crystal, please call the roll.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Vasili?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
And Mayor Johnson.
Yes. And with that, our business is done for the evening and the meeting is adjourned.